everyone, this is Sweta Tuladhar from Atu's online study, and today I'm going to give you my presentation on administrative reform in Nepal. And here I'm going to discuss about a concept of administrative reform, objectives of administrative reform, administrative reformers, implementation of administrative reform, efforts of administrative reform in Nepal, and challenges of administrative reform. Concept of administrative reform. Ever since the formation of states in the past, the government required capable and efficient administration to maintain law and order, extract necessary resources, protect the country from external aggression, and enhance physical boundaries. After the Second World War, a number of nation-states were free from colony in Asia, Africa, and other countries. At this moment, these new states and newly independent states have to attain the goal of economic development, social reforms, nation building, and internal harmony, external scrutiny, etc. But the several points rose by the leader during the struggle for freedom was impossible for a new government to fulfill. The working hand of the government administrative system was inadequate and incapable to meet the challenges. Therefore, this situation emphasized on reforming the administrative system in the changed context. An administrative reform is a conscious, well-considered change that is carried out in a public sector organization or system for the purpose of improving its structure, operation, or the quality of its workforce. Administration as government machinery has to be updated and matched with the private sector to move along with the time because it has to meet the new challenges in the public and private sectors. Government should be one step ahead than private sector. Therefore, the public administration must make sincere and serious efforts to meet the new demands, which are resultants of changes in outlook and behavior. So here are some definitions given by some intellectuals on administrative reform. According to G.E. Caden, the artificial inducement of administrative transformation against resistance is what we call as administrative reform. According to Bean Lee, administrative reform is an effort to apply new ideas and combination of ideas to administrative system with a view to improving the system for positive goals of national development. According to M.M. Khan, administrative reform are those efforts which call for or lead to major changes in the bureaucratic system of a country intended to transform the existing and established practices, behaviors, and structures within it. Administrative reform is characteristically focused on the capacity of government to make and implement public policy, the effectiveness of public programs, and strengthening of public institutions on a sustainable basis within the caveats of responsiveness, accountability, and equity. In such a context, there has been repeated emphasis on result-oriented public service in which outputs are measured, the responsible manager is held accountable, and individual motivation and self-actualization are promoted. Viewed from this perspective, the public administration can never remain static and can never be permanent or be applicable to all cases. Here arises the necessity of reforming administration. Administrative reforms are required when administration is failing to meet the demands and expectations put on it, not equipped to tackle extra demands, unable to anticipate future demands, and when government reach out of touch with the latest development in the field. There is necessity of administrative reform for meeting the people's expectation and demands, fulfilling political demands and supports, ensuring democracy and people's participation, inducing new values and norms, institutionalizing the government bureaucracy, and removing the integration lag, giving multidimensional role to bureaucracy. Objectives of administrative reform. It is obvious that in the course of the next few years, the requirements imposed on public administration activities as well as the external and internal conditions of its functioning will continue to change. However, already at present, it is possible to refer to the results of existing analysis and international comparisons and identify with relatively great accuracy both the principal shortcomings and the neuralgic points of public administration and the nature of the desired changes. The principal positive development trends which can be formulated as reform objectives are the following: orientation on the citizen and further democratization of public administration. The objective of the reform is to achieve that public administration will act primarily as a service to the citizens and undergo the further democratization. It is necessary to ensure its orientation on the needs of the citizen and the public, to bring administration closer to the citizen, to provide the citizen with better information, to communicate and cooperate with the public, to listen to the public, and to increase control of public administration by the public. It is necessary to cultivate the legal environment in public administration, to support the growth of legal consciousness in the country, and to improve the protection of human and civil rights. It is necessary to further decentralize public administration, to create the regional tier of territorial self-government, and to strengthen the role and financial resources of the self-government in the exercise of public administration. Achievement of standards of public administration. The objective of the reform is to raise public administration of the country to current standards in every respect. It must apply the methods of administration and information and communication technologies of information society. It must adopt and implement the following administrative values defining reliability, transparency, predictability, accountability, adaptability, and efficiency. These values must be surrounded in administrative institutions and processes at all levels, and their application must be checked by a system of independent controls, the courts and the parliaments. Professionalization of public administration. The objective of the reform is a high professional standard of professional public administration, which must be expressed in the quality of work, the results achieved, and the services provided. Enhanced administrative culture, ethical conduct, and political neutrality. The establishment of a professional civil service and the creation of an effective system of lifelong learning concerning all public administration employees are key prerequisites of professionalization. Efficiency of public administration. The objective of the reform is efficient public administration. It is necessary to aim public administration activities at clearly defined targets and results, ensuring that the costs of administration are proportionate to the results, and that improving productivity and searching for real savings become a standard and duly appreciated part of the activities of all public administration bodies and their employees. For achieving these objectives, administration reform tends to strengthen state training institutions, promote quality, efficiency, accountability, and ethics in governance, document and disseminate knowledge and apply best practices of public administration, implementation of provision of Right to Information Act 2064, designing, developing, and implementation of training programs for capacity building of civil servants, promoting administrative reforms in government structures, procedures, and processes for citizen-centric governance, and promoting modern management practices and reforms through e-governance. Administrative reformers. The reformers, or agents and agencies, are one of the most crucial variables and occupy an important position in the process of administrative reform. There is no exact rule to ascertain the agents or agencies. Administrative reform is, in fact, a matter of technical policy making, and a number of principal actors and groups are involved in it. So, in agencies, we have political leaders, experts and academicians, bureaucrats, foreign consultants, and experts, whereas as agents, we have legislature, executive, and ad hoc commission. Political leaders. All the actors holding political power are included in this category, and therefore they are not necessarily the rulers only. Political leadership is highly valued in the context of administrative reform because every administrative reform must stem from it. Moreover, its success requires not only the initial consent of government but also continuing and purposeful attention at the highest political level. The political actors largely regard administration as an instrument with which they maintain the political system as well as implement their party views and policies which determine the fate of administrative reform. Hence, experts and academicians. The other category of local reform agents belongs to the group of indigenous reform experts. They include the local technocrats, ex-bureaucrats, and academicians. Being a highly technical job, certain aspects in the process of administrative reform requires technical skills, and for having an experience and a less biased insider's view, sayings of the retired top bureaucrats also becomes essential. Similarly, academic expertise seems to be the most vital ones at the policy formulation stage of administrative reforms. It is, however, realized that reform for them becomes an end as well as a means. The categories often seem diverse. For this reason, and because it allows them the most room to operate, the experts and tend to favor broadly focused substantive programs. Their proposals are thus criticized for being highly technical, ambitious, and complex. Even then, there has been an increasing reliance on local consultants and experts in the formulation and implementation of administrative reform. Bureaucrats. Bureaucrats who carry out the program are another important segment among the local reform actors. They are the most direct targets of the various reform activities because almost all the behavioral aspects of administrative reform programs are meant for them. They have to play two important roles in the process of administrative reform, one as the reform policy formulators and the other as the policy implementers. With a view to avoiding implementation gap in the administrative reform, it is desirable to associate the implementers from the very beginning of program formulation. Foreign consultants and experts. In a number of developing countries, foreign consultants and experts are among the important actors involved in the formulation and implementation of administrative reform program. They may include the United Nations technical advisors and other experts and consultants invited for the purpose through bilateral and multilateral agreements. Largely due to the foreign experts' failure in recognizing the receiving countries' socio-cultural context, reforms formulated by the foreign consultants have not been successful in developing countries. Most of their recommendations often stress on, often without proper adaptation, transplanting for adopting Western model where the environmental context is entirely different. Failure in recognizing the reality of the third world has been one of the main reasons behind the continuous attacks on foreign consultants and other expatriate advisors. It is therefore suggested that reforms must be made by the reformers and the leaders within the country concerned and not by outsiders or foreigners. Legislature. Where the competitive political parties are cooperating, the legislature stands as one of the most effective sources of impetus for the idea and action of administrative reform. Therefore, legislature in democratic countries is an important juncture where from the idea of reform generates and get its momentum, where the programs to be implemented are sanctioned or enacted, and where a voice for their follow-up is raised. The legislature may directly undertake the reform by its lawmaking power or appoint a committee within it or authorize the executive to execute the reform programs. It may also create other statutory bodies such as committees or commissions incorporating its own representatives, executive branch and other private sectors for the initiation and implementation of administrative reform programs. Executive. The executive branch of government is another source of administrative reform. A number of reform ideas in the developing countries and elsewhere are often the will of the chief executive, and these are implanted directly through the executive orders or ordinances. In a good many developing countries, the role of legislature is declining due to various reasons. It is therefore necessary on the part of the executive to undertake the reform activities. The executive also may either declare reform or appoint an ad hoc commission or delegate responsibilities of reform to its subordinate bodies. Ad hoc commissions. Besides the executive and legislature, the administrative reform commissions are among the common administrative reform agencies. These are the high-powered specialized ad hoc statutory bodies set up primarily to realize the objectives and priorities of desired reform and also to suggest the ways and means and the technicalities of the contemplated programs. The government or the head of the state usually appoints the commission with prescribed terms of reference, mostly under the leadership of an eminent person. It may include among its members men of experience drawn from the public life, professional institution, senior civil servants, and experts from academic institutions or universities. The composition pattern of this agency looks relatively more representative than the other agencies, and thus its main advantage is its neutrality, representativeness, and bipartisanship. Approach to reform implementation. Public administration cannot be reformed in a few years. It is a long-term process which probably can be implemented only by several consecutive governments in a difficult, highly competitive, and rapidly changing external environment. Thus, it is not possible and it would not be reasonable to attempt to provide a detailed outline of the content and procedure of the whole reform at the very beginning. While some reform steps have been relatively clear from the outset, others will necessitate more profound analysis and discussions of the desired solutions. Apart from the principal objectives of the public administration reform listed above, it is necessary to reach consensus on the following principles which will govern the whole reform process. They are widely disseminating information on the reform, mobilizing interest of citizens, professionals, political representatives, and civil service servants in making the reform happen, democratically exchanging opinions on its desirable and feasible course, basing the reform on solid professional analysis of the present state and performance of public administration, and on periodic evaluation of the consequences of completed reform steps, using experience with public administration reform in the country while respecting our own tradition and experience, adopting a comprehensive approach to the reform, that is, no isolated and partial change should be implemented if not conceived as integral and organic parts of the total reform strategy and process. Viewing the reform as an open process, individual reform components will be continuously updated and adapted to the changes in the external environment of public administration and in other components of the reform, and will utilize experience acquired during implementation. Determining strategic priorities and limited number of priority changes for every reform phase on which attention and funds will have to concentrate. This should determine the overall progress of the reform and condition or influence all the other changes. Assuring continuity of the operation of public administration, which must continue to function also in the course of reorganization, decentralization, and other changes. Managing and coordinating the whole reform from a single center at the highest level of government. Current priorities of administrative reform. Currently, these are the priorities which are important, and they are completing and adopting a reform strategy. As a first step, the overall strategy of public administration reform suggested in this document should be developed in greater detail. This should be supplemented by detailed reform implementation plans for the next 2-3 years. The government should adopt the strategy and declare it officially in a way that duly reflects the significance of the reform for the future of the country. Political and public support to the reform. In the nearest phase of the reform, it will be necessary to gain a strong support of political circles, the general public, and the public servants themselves. For this, explanation of the significance, meaning, and principal objectives of the reform should be made clear among the public. The reform should be promoted through an explanatory information and public relation campaign in mass media by means of information materials in professional events and training courses, etc. Establishing an effective system for managing the reform. A functional and efficient management structure responsible for the conceptual design and implementation of the reform as a whole ought to be established as a matter of priority. At the same time, it is necessary to start using appropriate non-bureaucratic forms and procedures for informing on the reform and discussing and exploiting new ideas in cooperation with the general. Decentralizing state administration, reforming territorial administration. The territorial administration reform is closely connected with all other reform fields and will strongly influence the changes of competencies and methods of operation of the central government authorities. Launching the reform of key public administration processes. The proposals envisage a gradual reform of a number of key generic cross-functional processes whereby public administration exercises its functions. As a rule, a number of different public administration units participate in each of these processes. Reform commanding priority include the start of the reform of strategic management and policy making, the management of the public sector and the administration of public property, administrative procedure, communication with the citizens and public administration finances, with particular reference to territorial administration reform. The reform of further processes must be prepared for successive launching in the course of public administration reform. Adopting a Civil Service Act and starting to reform human resource management and development. Here, human resource is a critical factor for administrative reform. Hence, there are some of the provisions should be made for say increasing emphasis on training and the development of interpersonal skills, providing career advice and mentoring, encouragement of mobility and broadening experience, introducing participative management styles, providing performance feedback, introducing human resource development planning systems, human resource development planning, and devolution of personal management functions and powers. Administrative reform efforts in Nepal. In case of Nepal, various commission has been formed for administrative reform. Some of these commissions are Buch Commission 1952, Administrative Reforms Planning Commission 1957 headed by Tanka Acharya, Administrative Reforms Commission 1968 headed by Vedanand Jha, Administrative Reforms Commission 1975 headed by Beg Bahadur Thapa, Administrative Reforms Commission 1991 headed by J.P. Koirala, Governance Reforms Initiatives in 2001, Governance Reform Commission 2008. Buch Commission of 1952. One of the pioneering efforts to reform the administration in Nepal was the appointment of M.N. Buch, an Indian expert, as the head of Public Administration Reforms Committee in 1952. A committee consisted Sri M.N. Buch, ICS, as leader, Sri K.P. Matharani, ICS, and Sri S.K. Anand as IPS as members. From Government of Nepal, there were Secretary Mr. Tilak Samsher from Ministry of Law and Justice and Secretary Mr. Himalay Samsher from Ministry of Finance. The objective of commission was to study the existing organization of civil administration in Nepal in the various departments, both at the service, and make recommendations for its reorganizations. The Buch Committee report contained 12 chapters and 9 appendices. Some major recommendations are necessity of public service commissions for hiring and provisions for training all the government employees, decreasing the number of ministries, creation of post of chief secretary and abolition of the post of cabinet secretary, abolishment of traditional offices like Hajiri, Goswara and Attajats, necessity of Civil Service Act, introduction of filing system, highlight the necessity of accounting and financial regulations, reviewing of administrative procedures, need for a secretariat manual, need for administrative training, and need for obtaining service from Indian experts, decentralization and delegation of adequate financial powers. This committee had some defects as it was prepared visiting Nepal only 2 weeks before because of their time constraint. Report was prepared in India without involving Nepali. The draft was not discussed and not circulated for finalization, and model was over dependence on Indian models. Administrative Reforms Planning Commission 1957 headed by Tanka Acharya. Tanka Acharya was the 19th Prime Minister of Nepal and the founding leader of Nepal Praja Parishad, that is, Nepal People's Council. It was his first endogenous efforts for bringing about administrative reform in Nepal. And here in this reform, it mentions about introduction of Civil Service Acts, rules and regulations, establishment of O&M office, drafting of secretariat procedures, the establishment of an Institute of Public Administration and Clerical Training Center. Special emphasis was given on the recruitment and promotion on the basis of recommendation of Public Service Commission, Manual for the Bada Hakims, Anti-Corruption Act, Administrative Procedure Acts, a new pay scale for the civil servant, and constitution of 9 services under civil service, the preparation of a detailed procedure for screening the civil servants. Administrative Reforms Commission 1968 headed by Vedananda Jha. Vedananda Jha was a Nepalese politician who founded the Nepal Terai Congress in 1951, seeking autonomy for the Terai region. Later, he became an important politician during the Panchayat period. He was a cabinet minister at several times. This commission made recommendations in the areas of personal management, program budgeting, internal resource mobilization, and reducing political role in personal management. This reform constitutes about decreasing the number of ministries, neutrality of administrative machinery, reforming planning machinery, position classification, reviewing system of salary scale, unified civil service, and single central personal agency. Administrative Reforms Commission 1975 headed by Beg Bahadur Thapa. Beg Bahadur Thapa is a foreign affairs expert and diplomat. He is a former to various designations of government of Nepal, like Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nepal, Governor of NRB, Minister of Finance, State Minister, Secretary of Finance Ministry, and Ambassador to USA and India. This commission recommends promoting regional services, establishing regional offices, defining criteria for creating positions, increasing the level of civil service, making civil service officer oriented, and improving personnel management. This commission gives emphasis on organizational development, procedural improvement, improving financial administration, establishment of Ministry for Manpower Planning and Management, enhancing the capability of planning cells in each ministry, and establishment of Civil Service Training Institute and 75 Treasury and Account Control Offices, etc. Administrative Reforms Commission 1991, headed by Girja Prasad Koirala. Girja Prasad Koirala was an active Nepalese politician from Nepal Congress Party. He headed the Nepali Congress and served as the Prime Minister of Nepal. He acted as the head of the state of Nepal as the country transitioned from a monarchy to a republic. This commission recommended the involvement of non-government sector in service delivery, increasing the levels of the civil service, opening lateral entry at higher levels, and reducing the overall number of positions, and also dealt with some personal management issues. This commission gives emphasis on scope of government, establishing efficiency in delivery of service, redefining the role of Nepal Planning Commission, improving budgetary system, reforming civil service, human resources and career development, and introduction of job government. This reform gave emphasis on emphasizing merit-based civil service, continuity and timely fulfillment of the vacant post, introducing an effective service delivery system for developing a feeling of good governance by managing complaints and making effective public hearing, emphasizing the gender mainstreaming and promoting women, ethnic, Dalit, and disabled in the process of recruitment in public service, introducing timely review of salary benefit structures, right-sizing the civil service and developing professionalism, introducing performance incentive fund to motivate employees for their work. Administrative Reform Commission 2008. In its report on public administration in federal system 2012, has made some useful recommendations on structure, the allocation of responsibilities, and on the personal management system based on the functional analysis of roles and responsibilities as proposed by the thematic committees of the Constituent Assembly. The premises and principles it has adopted are as follows. Work volume rules and responsibilities should be taken as the main basis while setting up the organization. Work of similar nature should be done by a single organization. Define the minimum standard and maintain uniformity while establishing an organization which is of an autonomous nature. Every ministry at the center will not require a parallel entity at the province and local level also. Adopt a one-door system. Carry out the works by making the decision process quick and prompt. Make the services people-friendly by bringing behavioral changes in the employees. Clearly provide information to the service recipients regarding the service delivery by means of the Citizens Charter. Protect the rights and interests of the consumers and make provisions for providing compensation if the given quality of service could not be provided in the given time, and make all the works in the office transparent. After the People's Movement Second, Nepal is in verse of federalism. In this connection, the Administrative Restructuring Committee (ARC), which was constituted in 2010, recommended the structure and functions along with jurisdictions of the proposed federal, provincial, and local government. Still, it has not gained the concrete shape of administrative reforms. Challenges of administrative reform. A number of civil service reform commissions have been constituted and recommendations made for strengthening Nepal civil service. Despite 5 decades of experiments with democratic practices, the behavior and mindset of politicians and bureaucrats have not changed significantly to introduce civil service reforms on a result-oriented basis. Here are some of the reasons which makes administrative reform to be challenging. Lack of political will and support to carry on the process of civil service reform. Reforms usually start with political initiatives and are implemented by civil servants. However, political situation continues to remain unstable and the government has undergone frequent changes with the result that continuity in the efforts at the political level is often missing in the implementation. Civil service reform has never been the top priority agenda of the government. Low morale and productivity. The values and ethics in the civil service are fast deteriorating. There are code of conduct for civil servants like the servants should not use political influence with an intention to achieve personal interest, participate in political activities, criticize the government, and join demonstration and strikes. The civil servants are expected to demonstrate courtesy to the clients and are expected to uphold his/her conduct according to his/her service and position. But there is as yet no indication that an employee had been appreciated, promoted, or awarded for his pursuance of the code of conduct or for following ethical values in the civil service, nor has there been any cases. Measurement of productivity. Productivity of the civil service is notoriously difficult to measure. A study based on quantitative assessment is few and far between. The report of Secretary's Colloquium on Productivity, Quality and the Civil Service, NASC 1933, concludes that there is a need to establish productivity indicators and quality standards for all ministers. These could be created through the National Planning Commission. The productivity of the civil service appears to be the lowest for two reasons. A large number of civil servants is unproductive in the sense that either they are not skillful, competent, and well experienced to do the job they are expected to do, or that they are less motivated or different reasons to take up their assignment with zeal and enthusiasm. Uncertain prospects for career development. Civil servants suffer from uncertain prospects for career development. Merit and quality aspects are often compromised at the cost of efficiency, honesty, and hard labor. Insufficient linkages of merit to promotion in the career drives the staff to a point of total desperation, depriving them of whatever little courage, innovative, and vigor that they possess. The weak reward and punishment system. Despite emphasis in government policy documents, it hardly exists in a way that encourages the civil servants to shoulder additional responsibilities or take initiative to start innovative ways of doing things. Frequent changes in civil service rules and regulations along with changes in institutional structure. It is strange but true that in the name of updating, the Civil Service Act 1992 were amended for the second time in 2007, with amendments in several other acts having its impact on the Civil Service Act. Frequent changes in the Act and the civil service regulations following it have contributed to the creation of instability in the procedures and practice of the civil service. The frequent amendment of substantive provisions of the Act and regulation in itself is a source of instability in the overall civil service. Bureaucratic resistance. Bureaucrats in general are more negative towards reform than politicians unless reforms include the possibility of increasing their personal benefits. Bureaucrats are more conservative and resistive to change than their political masters, ministers, politicians, or people at large. One of the reasons is that at the end of the day, it is the civil servant that has to take on the responsibility to implement new measures, which means new and additional responsibilities, additional risks, departure from the existing system where they are accustomed to working with, and involves changes in the functions and responsibilities they consider as being not commensurate with existing perk and privileges, or that they can see less possibility for an increase in their perks and privileges. An example was the unsuccessful attempt to create a separate group for economic planning under the Nepal Economic Planning and Statistics Service, largely because of the opposition from the civil servants themselves on the ground that the creation will create less prospect of their promotion to higher positions because of the limited positions at the higher echelon. To this date, after most 1.5 a decade, there is still no separate group for economic planning, despite that the Civil Service Act 1992 and the subsequent amendments still maintain that provision. Civil service is more viewed as a problem than a solution. Bureaucrats always try to maximize their gains while formulating and implementing reform measures. This involves resorting to both ethical and unethical means to influence the pace and pattern of reform to suit their personal interest. This is an area where the conflict of interest between the civil servants and their political masters usually takes place. If the bureaucrats feel that the reform hampers the realization of their interests, then they are found to react negatively towards attempt to implement such reforms. Still, some of the reforms may also include the possibility of increasing personal benefits for bureaucrats. The introduction of performance-based incentive system may increase personal benefits and also efficiency for some, but so far has not been successful, or at best, its impact is unclear. Inter-hierarchical rivalry. At times, a conflict of interest regarding civil service reforms is visible between those serving at different hierarchical levels within the bureaucracy and within the level, as well as between the gazetted and non-gazetted levels, since the Nepalese civil service is still based on class system. Despite policy provisions to implement a unified civil service system, it is yet to be implemented. The lower level civil servants complains that the reform process have benefited those at the higher levels of bureaucracy at the cost of those at the lower levels. Disappropriate reform measures with the capacity of the government to implement them, or that reform measures are not sensitive to the known sources of resources, including human, physical, and others, to implement them. Past recommendations are more radical and more demanding in terms of resources and effort rather than pragmatic, more than what the government is willing to endorse and commit to implement. Further, the full-scale implementation of the recommendations was contingent on the subsequent TA support which the government expects to receive. Hence, recommendation suggestions are less practical. Pervasive corruption at all echelons of administration. Anti-corruption mechanism has remained weakest. Despite that, the institutions such as Commission for the Investigation of Abuse of Authority has given constitutional status. This is reflected in the massive corruption reported to have prevailed in the Nepalese civil service. The sources of unauthorized income include the issuance of citizenship certificate, land ownership certificate, So, it was pleasure for me to share my knowledge via Adu's online study channel. More of the educational videos are on the way, so do press like button, share button, and subscribe button. And do leave your valuable comments in comment box so that it would help us to improve our weakness and maintain better sides of us. So, thank you.